I am setting this down in the same clipped manner I used in official reports, because that is the only way I can keep my hands steady long enough to finish a sentence. In 2003 I was assigned to Buncombe County on a joint detail that put me in and out of the wooded edges east and south of Asheville, where jurisdiction blurs between city limits, parkland, and the kind of country that still swallows sound. I was a police officer, not a storyteller, and my work had trained me to weigh what I saw against what could be proven. I did not keep personal records as a rule. That rule is part of why this one survived, misfiled among duplicate forms and old evidence tags, never entered into the proper chain. My assignment began with something ordinary, an administrative solution to an administrative problem. The department needed a uniformed presence to accompany county and park personnel during a short run of late summer calls, trespass complaints, vandalism at trailheads, reports of gunshots that turned out to be backfires or hunters too close to posted boundaries. Asheville was growing, and with growth came friction at the seams, where neighborhoods met treeline and the treeline met steep ground. My captain used the words visibility and deterrence. I heard babysitting. I took the detail because it was uncomplicated and because uncomplicated work is a kind of rest. The first weeks were routine in a way that encourages complacency. I rode with a park ranger on some days, alone on others, checking pull-offs and gates, logging plate numbers for vehicles parked after hours, shining a light into the back of vans that smelled of sweat and cheap beer. We wrote warnings more often than citations. We moved people along without argument. The woods around Asheville can look tame from the road at green walls, polite trail signs, little maps behind plexiglass, but beyond the maintained paths the land breaks into rhododendron thickets and rock shelves that turn a few yards into a maze. I had grown up in North Carolina and I respected the terrain the way you respect water. You do not argue with it, you do not assume it will forgive you. The detail put me near the Blue Ridge Parkway more than once, but on the day that matters I was assigned to the southern fringe, where old logging cuts and service roads thread toward steeper country. The radio traffic that morning carried nothing unusual, the usual low-level chatter that becomes background noise. I checked in at the start of shift, noted the humidity in my own mind without writing it down, and watched the sky thickening with the kind of clouds that press down rather than threaten. I remember the smell most, wet earth that had not yet been rained on, a dark richness like turned soil. It was the smell of a place that expects storms and has learned to keep its secrets undergrowth deep. At 14:17 hours, the call came through as a vehicle accident, single car, possible injury, no fire. The location was given as a service road access point off a lesser-used spur, a place where the pavement ends without ceremony and gravel begins. Dispatch added that the report came from a cell phone with a weak signal and that the caller sounded confused. Confusion after an accident is common, it means blood loss or shock, sometimes intoxication. I acknowledged, stated my unit number, and rolled out, thinking in the practical sequence of arrival, assessment, safety, medical, report. I did not think about anything else because there was no reason to. The access road narrowed quickly, pines leaning in as if to inspect the cruiser. My tires tossed gravel, dust rose and hung in the air because the wind was wrong, present in the treetops, absent at ground level. I passed a gate pulled open, a broken chain hanging like a cut tendon. Someone had been there with bolt cutters or brute force. I logged it mentally for later and continued, noting the angle of the sun and the way the light failed to reach the lower trunks. I remember feeling irritation that someone would force an access meant for maintenance and emergency, irritation that always comes before paperwork. It was a clean, rational annoyance, and in the moment it made me feel competent. I found the vehicle just past a bend where the road dipped toward a shallow ravine. A dark sedan had left the gravel, clipped saplings, and nosedived into a tangle of underbrush, its rear end still visible like a stranded animal. The driver's door was open. The hood steamed faintly, not smoke, not fire, the quiet exhalation of heat meeting damp air. There was no horn, no hazard lights, no engine noise. It looked staged in the way a scene sometimes does when you arrive after someone has done the wrong thing and then left it for you to interpret. The quiet was sharp, the kind of quiet that makes you listen for your own breath. I approached on foot with my hand near my sidearm out of habit more than fear. I called out, identified myself, repeated it. No answer. I moved closer and saw blood on the doorframe, a dark smear drying at the edges, and more on the gravel where a hand or shoulder had pressed down. The scent of it did not carry far. Humidity holds smells close, but it was enough to anchor the situation in reality. Injury, movement, someone still nearby. I radioed my location and requested EMS to stage at the pavement, explaining that the road might not accommodate a larger vehicle. My voice on the radio was steady. I can still hear it in my memory as if it belonged to someone else. Inside the car, the front seats were empty. The passenger side had been shoved hard enough to crumple the dashboard, and the windshield had a spiderweb fracture that caught light like ice. A purse lay open on the floorboard, contents spilled, a cheap watch face cracked in half. The key was still in the ignition, turned to accessory. A faint static hiss came from the radio, the volume low. I noted these details with the same detached attention I had used on dozens of scenes, because details are what give you control. Then I saw the pattern in the blood, not pooling, not sprayed, but wiped, deliberately smeared in long strokes along the edge of the seat and the pillar, as if someone had used the inside of the car to steady themselves while exiting. It suggested a person leaving under their own power, and that was both reassuring and troubling. I followed the blood out, marking the first droplets on leaves, the dull red against glossy green. The trail went downhill into thicker growth where the underbrush closed in and forced me to turn my shoulders sideways. I called out again, shorter this time, sharper, the voice you use when you want to be heard without sounding afraid. There was still no answer. I crouched and examined the ground for prints, expecting the usual sliding shoes, broken branches, a path of disturbance. What I found instead was the absence of normal disturbance, as if the person had moved without pushing through, without trampling. Leaves that should have been crushed were merely brushed. Twigs that should have snapped had been bent and sprung back. It made no sense, and I dismissed it as my own inexperience reading sign in thick country. Further down, the ravine opened into a narrow drainage where stones were slick with old moss. The air changed there, cooler, and the smell of wet rock and decaying leaf litter became stronger than the smell of gasoline. I found a scrap of fabric snagged on a thorn, light-colored, torn clean, not frayed. Nearby, on a flat stone, there was a handprint in blood, too large at first glance, the finger splayed wide. I leaned closer and saw it was not simply large, it was shaped wrong. The palm area was elongated, the finger pads longer than they should have been, as if the hand that made it had proportions meant for a different kind of grip. I told myself it could be distortion, a smear, a pressed glove. I told myself those things because the alternative did not fit in any report format I had ever used. I radioed again, updated that I had a blood trail and was moving on foot, asked for the ranger unit that had been with me earlier in the week, someone who knew the service roads better than I did. Dispatch acknowledged. My own breathing was louder than it should have been. I paused, listening, and heard nothing but the slow drip of water somewhere ahead. There were no birds. In that region, even when the woods are quiet, you can usually hear something: crows complaining, small songbirds flicking from branch to branch, squirrels scolding. The absence was not dramatic, not a sudden silence like in films, it was a gradual thinning out, as if the woods had decided to withhold its ordinary noise without announcing the decision. I continued because that is what you do when someone is injured and you are the first to arrive. Each step became a deliberate act, not because I felt fear then, but because I felt the uncomfortable awareness that my authority did not extend into that ravine. A uniform and a badge mean something on asphalt, in a house, under streetlights. In dense mountain woods they become cloth and metal, and the only thing they guarantee is that you are conspicuous. As I moved, I felt the sensation of being watched for the first time, not a thought, not a belief, but a physical pressure at the back of the neck, the way hair rises when a door opens behind you. I stopped and turned slowly, scanning trunks and shadows, expecting to see a person, an animal, anything that would give that sensation a proper cause. I saw only vegetation and the dim slope behind me, and the blood drops that marked my path like a line drawn for something else to follow. The blood trail continued beyond the vehicle in a direction that did not align with any established path. It moved downhill into terrain that had not been maintained in years, where the forest reclaimed space without resistance. I paused briefly at the edge of the descent, listening for movement, listening for anything that would confirm the injured driver was still within reach of assistance. The forest did not respond. It remained in its own internal order, unaffected by my presence. I stepped forward, adjusting my flashlight instinctively, directing its beam along the ground ahead of me. Even in daylight, the terrain resisted clear visibility. Dense undergrowth and uneven soil created shadows that concealed depth and form. Without that light, the ground itself would have been unreliable, capable of hiding hazards that could not be predicted. The beam cut through that uncertainty, giving structure to what would otherwise remain undefined. The air grew cooler as I descended, the temperature shift subtle but noticeable. Moisture lingered beneath the canopy, preserving the scent of earth and decomposition. My boots pressed into soil softened by years of accumulated organic decay. Each step required deliberate placement. Routine patrol had not prepared me for terrain that behaved this way, terrain that absorbed presence without acknowledging it. The blood trail remained visible, but its pattern did not reflect the expected irregularity of human injury. The droplets were spaced too consistently, forming a sequence that suggested controlled movement rather than collapse or panic. I crouched briefly, directing the flashlight beam closer to the ground. The edges of the blood had begun to darken, indicating exposure to air long enough for oxidation to begin. The driver had been ahead of me longer than dispatch had estimated. I rose slowly, scanning the surrounding vegetation. The flashlight beam illuminated tree trunks and undergrowth, but it did not penetrate beyond immediate surfaces. Light provided clarity, but it also revealed its own limitations. There were layers of terrain the beam could not reach, spaces between objects where visibility ended abruptly. Those spaces remained intact, unaffected by illumination. I called out again, identifying myself clearly. My voice carried forward but did not echo. Sound did not behave normally in that environment. It dissipated quickly, absorbed by the density of vegetation and terrain. The absence of response did not confirm absence of presence. It only confirmed that response was not being offered. I continued forward, adjusting the beam to track the blood trail as it curved around exposed roots and stone. The light reflected off wet surfaces, creating brief distortions that resolved into recognizable shapes only after sustained focus. Without that controlled illumination, I would have misjudged distance and structure repeatedly. The forest did not present itself as hostile. It presented itself as indifferent. That indifference created conditions where visibility became the only reliable form of control. I maintained the beam at a steady angle, preserving consistent visual reference as I moved deeper. There were moments when the light revealed nothing, when it passed across terrain without interruption. Those moments created false reassurance. They suggested emptiness where emptiness could not be confirmed. The beam did not guarantee absence. It only confirmed what it touched. My breathing remained steady, but my awareness had sharpened beyond routine operational focus. Each movement forward required conscious decision. Each shift of the beam created new certainty and new uncertainty simultaneously. The blood trail led toward a narrowing of the ravine where vegetation thickened further. Light reached only a limited distance ahead. Beyond that distance, structure dissolved into obscurity. I understood then that my visibility existed only within the range I could create for myself. And beyond that range, the forest remained intact, unobserved, and unaffected by my attempt to define it. I did not raise my weapon. Training dictates that you do not escalate against what you cannot identify with certainty, and in that moment certainty was absent in every direction. I held still, forcing myself to breathe evenly, trying to reconcile the shape before me with any known animal or person. It was too tall, but distance can lie. It was too broad, but shadow can exaggerate. I waited for it to move with the erratic uncertainty of wildlife startled by human presence. It did not. It remained upright, fixed, and aware in a way that suggested patience rather than surprise. I stepped slightly to my left to improve my angle through the brush. The movement was slow, deliberate, chosen to avoid triggering reflexive flight. The figure responded not by fleeing but by adjusting its own posture, an almost imperceptible shift, like weight transferring from one limb to another. The motion was smooth but wrong, the joints bending with an economy that implied strength held in reserve rather than exerted. It did not lean forward or back as a person might to see better. It simply repositioned itself so that it continued to face me directly, maintaining alignment without hesitation. It had understood my movement and compensated for it instantly. A faint tremor passed through my hands then, subtle but undeniable. I tightened my grip on the radio to anchor myself physically, reminding my body that it was still under command. I brought the handset close to my mouth and transmitted, keeping my voice level through force of habit. Dispatch, visual on possible subject. Standing. Not responding to verbal. I stopped short of describing it. I did not yet have words that would survive documentation. The reply that came back was broken by static, fragments of syllables dissolving into noise. I caught my unit number, then silence again. I called out toward the figure. Police. Step forward. My voice sounded foreign in my own ears, too loud for the space. The figure did not obey, did not retreat. It remained precisely where it was, its outline blending with the vertical forms behind it. The longer I looked, the more I saw. Its arms hung lower than a man's would, the forearms extending beyond what proportion would allow. The shoulders were massive, sloped slightly forward as if the spine curved differently from ours. There was no clothing, no color break to suggest fabric. It was uniform in tone, dark but not purely black, something closer to wet bark. I forced myself to analyze instead of react. The human brain seeks pattern first. I measured its height against a nearby sapling and found that it exceeded it by a margin that made my throat tighten. 7 feet would have been extraordinary. This exceeded that estimate. 8 feet, perhaps more, depending on posture. Its head was slightly inclined downward, angled toward me, which gave the impression not of submission but of evaluation. It was studying. That was the word that surfaced, unwanted but accurate. It was studying me the way I was studying it. The smell reached me again then, stronger than before. Not rot alone, but something older, like damp fur and stone sealed in darkness. It filled the clearing without direction, without the usual cues of wind or proximity. My stomach reacted before my mind did, muscles tightening involuntarily. My breathing became shallow. I fought to control it, because breathing is the first betrayal of fear. If it heard that change, it gave no outward sign. Its stillness was absolute, broken only by the slow expansion and contraction of its chest. Even at that distance, I could see the rhythm of breath. Behind me, somewhere beyond the trees, I heard the distant crackle of a radio. Another unit had arrived at the road. The sound was faint but distinct, an intrusion from the world I understood. I turned my head slightly, instinctively orienting toward that familiar noise. When I looked back, the figure had not retreated. It had not advanced. It remained, fixed in that same place, maintaining the distance it had chosen. That choice carried intention. Animals flee or charge. This did neither. It held position as if distance itself were part of the communication. I became aware then of the blood trail again, noticing how it ended at the edge of the clearing. There were no drops beyond. The ground between me and the figure was clean. Whatever had bled had reached this place and stopped leaving evidence. I realized with a cold clarity that the blood had not led me to a victim in the usual sense. It had led me here. The implication was not immediate, but it took root in the back of my mind and began to grow, slow and inescapable. The radio on my shoulder hissed once more. This time I heard my name clearly, spoken by the ranger assigned to the detail earlier that week. His voice was strained, distorted by terrain and distance. "Hold position," he said. "Do not approach." I did not answer at once. I kept my eyes on the figure because looking away felt like surrendering control. I realized then that my body had begun to lock in place, muscles tightening in a reflex older than training. Freezing is not a decision. It is a surrender of motion to survival. I answered the ranger finally, keeping my voice low. "Visual contact," I said. The words felt inadequate. I wanted to say more, to explain, but explanation requires shared language. I did not know if language existed for what I was seeing. He responded with a pause that stretched too long, then a single word that changed the structure of the moment. Understood. He did not ask for description. He did not question. He accepted. That acceptance unsettled me more than anything else. It suggested prior knowledge, prior exposure, something already accounted for outside my awareness. My authority in that clearing diminished in an instant, replaced by the realization that I had entered a situation that did not begin with me. The figure across the clearing remained unmoving, deliberate, and aware. It did not acknowledge the ranger's voice. It acknowledged only me. The ranger's response did not come immediately after his acknowledgement. There was a pause long enough for me to hear my own pulse in my ears, steady but heavier than it should have been. When he spoke again, his voice carried a restraint that did not belong to ordinary field communication. "Do not advance," he repeated. "Maintain distance." He did not ask what I saw. He did not request confirmation. He spoke as if the situation already had parameters, as if my presence there was an intrusion into something pre-existing rather than the beginning of an investigation. I kept my eyes fixed on the figure. The longer I observed, the more its details became defined, emerging from shadow without any movement on its part. Its head was disproportionate, not larger in mass, but extended slightly forward, the face projecting beneath a heavy brow ridge. The brow itself cast a permanent shadow over the upper face, obscuring the eyes until it shifted its angle by a fraction. When it did, I saw the reflection of light on its eyes, not the scattered shine of animal tapetum but something more focused, like the controlled reflection from a polished surface. The gaze was direct and uninterrupted. Its mouth was closed, but the shape of the jaw was unmistakable. It was broader than a human jaw, the muscles along its sides thick and pronounced beneath the surface. The lips, if they could be called that, were thin and drawn tight against the structure beneath. There was no expression in the human sense, no anger, no fear, but there was awareness. The stillness of its face was not emptiness. It was containment. It had no need to show anything beyond observation. Its skin or surface was not uniform. What I had initially interpreted as fur resolved into layers. The outer covering was dark brown, dense, and matted in places, but beneath it I could see patches where the underlying skin showed through. That skin was thick and grayish, with a dry texture that resembled bark more than flesh. It was not the pliant, vulnerable surface of mammals. It looked resistant, hardened by exposure to conditions I could not define. There were scars across its chest and shoulders, pale lines cutting through the darker covering, evidence of prior damage that had healed without weakening it. Its arms hung at its sides, extending well past the midpoint of its thighs. The hands were large, the fingers elongated and slightly curved, not in tension but in readiness. The proportions did not align with human anatomy. The joints were placed correctly but stretched, as if scaled beyond the limits that govern our structure. The legs were thick, powerful, supporting its weight with absolute stability. Its posture was not slouched in fatigue. It leaned forward just enough to suggest forward potential, like something perpetually prepared to close distance but choosing not to. I became aware then of its breathing in a more precise way. The expansion of its chest was slow and controlled, the inhalations deep but silent. The exhalations were measured, not forced. There was no visible urgency, no sign of agitation. Its physiology did not reflect the instinctive reactions I had seen in animals confronted by humans. It was not startled. It was not threatened. It was present because it had chosen to be present. I forced myself to shift my weight slightly, testing its response. The movement was minimal, but it registered. Its head tilted by a degree, correcting its angle to maintain its line of sight. The motion was smooth, uninterrupted by hesitation. It did not flinch. It did not react emotionally. It adjusted as one might adjust a lens, maintaining clarity. My body responded in ways I did not consciously permit. My breathing shortened. My hands trembled despite my effort to still them. A pressure formed in my chest, not pain but compression, as if the air around me had thickened. My mouth had gone dry. I swallowed and found it difficult to produce saliva. The instinct to look away grew stronger, not because I feared what I would see, but because continuing to see it felt like exposure to something corrosive. The ranger's voice came again through the radio, quieter now. "Do not provoke," he said. The phrasing was deliberate. He did not say, "Do not approach." He did not say, "Retreat." He said, "Do not provoke." That word carried implications that extended beyond animal behavior. Provocation implies interpretation, awareness of intent. It implies an entity capable of recognizing action as communication. I understood then that I was no longer the observer in control of the encounter. Observation was mutual. It knew I was there. It knew I saw it. And it allowed that recognition to persist. The environment around us had altered in ways subtle but undeniable. The insects that should have occupied the clearing were absent. The leaves did not move despite the wind I could see in the higher canopy. Sound did not carry normally. My own breathing seemed contained, as if the air itself refused to transmit it. The clearing had become an isolated space, separated from the ordinary function of the forest. I realized with increasing certainty that this moment was not accidental. It had not wandered into my presence. It had positioned itself deliberately, using distance and concealment to control the encounter. It did not act with instinctive randomness. It acted with decision. And I remained there, unable to justify retreat, unable to justify advance, held in place by the understanding that any movement I made would be interpreted, and that interpretation would have consequences I did not yet comprehend. The ranger's next transmission came as a whisper shaped into words. "Do you see it clearly?" he asked. The question was measured, stripped of surprise, stripped of disbelief. He did not require clarification of what it was. He assumed shared understanding without the need for definition. I hesitated before answering, not because I doubted my own perception, but because saying yes would confirm something that could not be undone. "Yes," I said finally. My voice sounded thin, constrained by the dryness in my throat. There was another pause. In that silence, the figure did not shift, did not blink, did not alter its posture in any observable way. It remained fixed, and in that fixedness I felt something that did not belong in any procedural manual. It was not hostility. It was not curiosity in the ordinary sense. It was evaluation, as precise and impersonal as the measurement of distance or weight. I realized that whatever this was, it did not need to hurry. Time did not constrain it the way it constrained me. "Do not assign meaning," the ranger said quietly over the radio. "Do not engage beyond observation." His phrasing was unnatural. Officers are trained to assess, to interpret, to categorize. Meaning is the foundation of response. To be instructed not to assign meaning was to be told to suspend the very process that allowed me to function in uniform. I did not respond to him. I could not. Because meaning was already forming, unavoidable, shaped by what my senses could not dismiss. The figure shifted its weight then, the first substantial movement since I had seen it. The motion was slow, controlled, the transfer of mass from one leg to the other without any loss of balance. The ground beneath it compressed visibly, the soil yielding to its weight. It did not step forward. It did not retreat. It only adjusted its posture, reinforcing the sense that every motion was deliberate, chosen rather than reflexive. The muscles beneath its surface moved with cohesion, the structure of its body unified in a way that suggested efficiency rather than strain. Its eyes remained fixed on mine. They were dark, but not opaque. There was depth there, an internal reflection that did not scatter. It was not the glassy stare of animals I had seen in headlights. It was focused. Directed. It did not look past me. It looked at me. That distinction became impossible to ignore. I became aware of my own posture, my stance, the placement of my hands, the angle of my shoulders. I was being assessed not as an obstacle, but as a presence. My heart rate had increased, though I had not allowed panic to surface. The sensation was contained within my chest, a steady acceleration without outward expression. My fingers had begun to stiffen, the muscles tightening involuntarily. I forced them to relax, flexing them slightly to maintain control. The effort required to perform that simple action was disproportionate to the movement itself. My body had begun to resist my own commands. The smell intensified again, carrying more than decay. There was an organic density to it, a thickness that filled the air and clung to the back of my throat. It was not offensive in the conventional sense. It was invasive. It altered my breathing, making each inhalation feel incomplete. I could not draw in air without also drawing in its presence. That presence extended beyond sight. It occupied space in ways that sight alone could not define. The ranger spoke again, his voice barely audible. "If it advances, you withdraw slowly. Do not turn your back." His instruction confirmed what my instincts had already begun to understand. This was not an animal encounter governed by predictable escalation. This was something else, something governed by intention rather than reaction. I did not ask how he knew. The certainty in his voice was enough. The figure tilted its head slightly, a motion that would have appeared almost human if not for the proportions involved. The angle of the tilt suggested examination, like an adjustment to refine focus. It was not a gesture of confusion. It was a gesture of precision. I felt exposed in a way that uniform and weapon could not mitigate. Those symbols of authority did not register here. They held no meaning for it. My mouth had gone completely dry. I swallowed and felt nothing. My breathing was shallow, controlled by force of will rather than comfort. The instinct to retreat was present, but it was restrained by the knowledge that movement would signal intention. I understood then that the boundary between observation and engagement had already been crossed the moment I had seen it and remained. The figure did not need to move closer to exert control over the encounter. Its stillness was sufficient. Its presence was sufficient. And in that presence, I began to understand that my arrival at that clearing had not been an interruption. It had been an inclusion. I remained where I was, holding my position at the edge of the clearing, aware that any sudden movement would alter the balance of what had already been established. The figure stood at distance, partially concealed by vegetation and shadow, yet its presence was no longer uncertain. It occupied physical space. It reflected light. It existed within the same environment as myself, but it did not belong to the same order of movement or reaction. My flashlight beam remained steady, directed toward its position. The light reached it, but only partially. Its surface absorbed illumination in a way that prevented full clarity. Certain areas became visible, the outline of its shoulders, the length of its arms, but other areas remained undefined, as if the structure of its form resisted complete observation. Light alone was insufficient to fully resolve it. I adjusted my stance slightly, attempting to refine my angle of view. The beam shifted with my movement, and for a brief moment its facial structure emerged more clearly. The brow ridge was pronounced, extending forward and downward, creating permanent shadow over the upper portion of its face. Its eyes remained visible within that shadow, reflecting the light without distortion. The reflection was controlled, focused, and deliberate. Even under direct illumination, its full form remained partially concealed. The density of the surrounding terrain combined with its own structural properties created a boundary to visibility that could not be overcome by ordinary means. It did not hide through motion. It remained visible and concealed simultaneously. Its breathing was slow and measurable. The expansion of its chest occurred at regular intervals, each inhalation deep and controlled. The exhalations did not produce visible condensation or sound. The absence of audible breath reinforced its control over its own presence. It did not reveal more than it intended. I realized then that visibility itself was conditional. My ability to see it depended entirely on the limitations of my equipment and environment. The forest imposed boundaries on perception, and those boundaries favored concealment. It existed comfortably within those limits, unaffected by the constraints imposed on me. Its posture remained forward inclined, distributing its weight in a manner that preserved both stability and readiness. The proportions of its limbs did not align with human anatomy. The arms extended beyond expected length, the hands positioned low but not resting against its legs. The structure of its body suggested adaptation to terrain and movement patterns unfamiliar to human physiology. Its head shifted slightly, correcting its angle by only a few degrees. The motion was precise, efficient, and silent. It did not display hesitation. It did not display uncertainty. The adjustment ensured that its line of sight remained aligned with mine. My breathing had become shallow without my conscious consent. I forced myself to inhale more deeply, but the effort produced only limited relief. The air in the clearing felt heavier, as if resistance existed within it. My body responded with tightening muscles and restricted movement, conditions that reduced my ability to act without deliberate effort. The light remained fixed on its form, but I understood that illumination did not grant full control. It granted only partial access. It allowed me to confirm its presence, but it did not allow me to define it completely. Its eyes remained locked onto mine, uninterrupted. It allowed the observation to continue, but it controlled the conditions under which that observation occurred. And I understood then that it was not avoiding visibility. It was regulating it. The realization that it was revealing itself rather than being discovered altered something fundamental inside my perception. Until that moment, I had believed I was the active participant, the one who had followed the trail, entered the clearing, and established visual contact. But the truth began to assert itself in quiet increments. The trail had not resisted me. The terrain had not concealed it completely. It had been visible when it chose to be visible. The encounter had been structured in advance, and I had only fulfilled the final step by arriving. My legs began to feel unsteady, not from exhaustion but from a loss of certainty in my own physical control. The muscles responded slower to command. My knees did not buckle, but they threatened the possibility. I adjusted my stance subtly, widening my feet for balance. The movement was small, yet it felt exposed, like an admission of weakness. Its eyes tracked the adjustment instantly. There was no delay, no searching motion. It had seen the shift at the exact moment it occurred. My breathing became difficult to regulate. Each inhalation was shallow, insufficient to fully satisfy the demand of my lungs. My chest felt tight, not with pain, but with restriction. I opened my mouth slightly to draw in more air, and immediately became aware of how vulnerable that gesture was. Exposure is involuntary when the body prioritizes survival over dignity. I closed my mouth again and forced myself to breathe through my nose despite the invasive odor that filled each breath. A tremor moved through my hands, beginning in the fingers and extending into the wrists. It was not violent. It was subtle but undeniable. I tightened my fists to suppress it, pressing my nails into my palms. The pressure grounded me momentarily. Pain is clarifying. It reminds the body that it still belongs to itself. But even that sensation felt diminished, as if my nervous system had begun to withdraw from its normal responsiveness. The figure did not move closer. It did not retreat. It remained positioned at that precise distance, its posture unchanged except for the slow rhythm of breath. Its stillness exerted its own form of pressure. Motion can be interpreted, anticipated. Stillness offers no prediction. It held itself in a state of complete control, and that control extended into the space between us. I noticed then that its eyes had not wavered from mine for more than brief intervals. It did not scan the environment. It did not check for other threats. Its attention was singular. Focused. That level of attention carried weight. It was not curiosity. It was assessment. I was not merely being observed. I was being evaluated. My stomach tightened further, nausea forming beneath the surface. It was not severe enough to produce immediate physical reaction, but it was persistent. The sensation of internal imbalance spread outward, affecting my sense of orientation. The ground beneath my feet remained stable, yet I felt disconnected from it, as if my body no longer trusted its own position in space. I became aware of my heartbeat, heavy and deliberate. Each beat was pronounced, resonating in my chest and throat. It was louder than it should have been. I wondered briefly if it could hear it. The thought was irrational, but it did not leave. Its ears remained still, offering no indication of sensory focus, yet its awareness felt complete. My vision remained clear, but my peripheral awareness narrowed. The clearing existed in sharp focus, while everything beyond it faded into irrelevance. The world had contracted to the space between myself and the figure. Time itself seemed to slow, not literally, but in perception. Each second carried more weight than it should have. The instinct to look away became overwhelming. Direct eye contact sustained the connection, but it also sustained the pressure. Looking away would break that line, but it would also surrender awareness. Both options carried risk. I forced myself to maintain visual contact, not out of courage, but because ignorance felt more dangerous than exposure. The figure inhaled again, deeper this time. Its chest expanded fully, then contracted slowly. The motion was controlled, deliberate. It was not reacting to fear. It was maintaining presence. It did not need to advance to assert dominance over the encounter. Its stillness alone was sufficient. I understood then that my fear was not the product of immediate threat. It was the product of recognition. Recognition that I was standing before something that existed outside the structures I had trusted my entire life. And that it knew I had recognized it. My eyes had fully adjusted to the lighting of the clearing, and with that adjustment came the removal of any remaining ambiguity. The figure was no longer partially obscured by shadow in my perception. It stood in full structural definition, its form resolved with a clarity that did not rely on imagination or assumption. The distance remained constant, but the certainty of what I was seeing had deepened beyond reinterpretation. There was no possibility of misidentification. It was physically present. It occupied space. It cast weight into the ground beneath it. The proportions of its body revealed themselves with increasing precision. Its torso was elongated, the ribcage broader than a human's, with subtle ridges visible beneath the surface where muscle anchored to bone. The abdomen did not sag or soften. It was firm, contained, protected beneath thickened skin and layered covering. The spine was not fully vertical as in human posture. It leaned forward slightly, distributing its mass in a way that suggested both balance and readiness. It was not a posture of weakness. It was a posture of control. Its shoulders were the most imposing structural feature. They extended outward and downward, forming a frame that appeared capable of absorbing force without collapse. The muscles beneath the surface were not defined in the aesthetic sense seen in trained human bodies. They were dense, functional, shaped by necessity rather than design. There was no excess. Every element served mechanical purpose. Its arms hung below the level of its pelvis, the forearms longer than human proportion allows. The joints did not appear fragile or vulnerable. They were reinforced by surrounding tissue, capable of sustaining immense load. The hands remained slightly curled, relaxed but not passive. Each finger was thick and elongated, the joints pronounced beneath the surface. The nails were dark, not reflective, and thickened in a way that suggested durability beyond human composition. Its legs were equally disproportionate in strength. The thighs were thick, the muscles layered in a way that supported both upright stance and forward propulsion. The knees did not lock in the rigid manner of human posture. They remained slightly flexed, preserving readiness without strain. The lower legs were compact and powerful, anchoring its mass firmly to the ground. Its feet were not fully visible beneath the covering of leaves and shadow, but their placement suggested width beyond human proportion. Its face remained the most disturbing element. The brow ridge projected forward, creating a permanent structural shadow that concealed the upper region of the eyes. The eyes themselves remained visible within that shadow, dark and reflective, focused without interruption. The nose was broad and flattened, the nostrils slightly expanded as it drew measured breath. The mouth remained closed, but the underlying structure of the jaw was unmistakably powerful, capable of exerting force beyond human capacity. The surface of its skin where visible was not smooth. It was thickened, textured, resistant. Fine lines crossed it, not in patterns of aging but in patterns of adaptation. The hair covering the rest of its body was uneven, matted in places, clean in others, suggesting contact with environmental surfaces over extended time. It was not ornamental. It was protective. Its stillness remained absolute. There was no trembling, no shifting of weight beyond what was necessary to maintain structural balance. It did not display restlessness. It did not display discomfort. It existed in its environment without disruption, as if the clearing itself had formed around it rather than the other way around. My own body continued to betray subtle signs of distress. My breathing remained restricted, my chest tight. My hands trembled intermittently despite my attempts to suppress the motion. The effort required to maintain stillness mirrored its own stillness, but unlike it, my stillness was enforced, not natural. My muscles resisted prolonged immobility. Its did not. The understanding formed slowly but irreversibly. This was not an animal behaving unpredictably. This was not a human misidentified under poor conditions. This was a biological structure that existed outside the categories I had trusted. It was real in the physical sense. It was present in the immediate sense. And it was aware in the deliberate sense. Its eyes did not leave mine. It allowed the observation to continue uninterrupted. It did not hide. It did not advance. It simply remained, permitting recognition to complete itself fully. Its gaze did not wander. It did not scan the environment in search of threats or escape routes. It remained fixed on me with uninterrupted precision, as if my presence had already been accounted for long before I arrived. That was the first detail that separated it from any animal I had encountered before. Animals react. Animals adjust. This did neither. It maintained awareness as if awareness had never been interrupted. The duration of its observation exceeded what instinct alone could sustain. Its eyes did not blink frequently. They did not shift randomly. They remained aligned with mine, holding position with deliberate control. It was not identifying me. It had already identified me. What remained was evaluation. I became aware then of the sequence of events that had led me into the clearing. The vehicle crash. The blood trail. The absence of resistance in the terrain. Each step had occurred without obstruction. Nothing had prevented my approach. Nothing had concealed the path completely. The environment had allowed me to arrive precisely where I now stood. That realization introduced a possibility I had not previously considered. The path had not simply existed. It had remained available. Available to be followed. Available to be completed. The clearing was not discovered accidentally. It was reached. Its nostrils expanded slightly, drawing in air through controlled inhalation. It was not reacting to my presence in surprise. It was confirming information already obtained through observation and proximity. Its awareness extended beyond sight alone. I understood then that visual contact was not the beginning of its awareness of me. Visual contact was the beginning of my awareness of it. The distinction was critical. Its posture did not change. It did not need to reposition itself to maintain visual control. It remained stable, balanced, and fully present within its environment. The forest did not obscure it. The forest supported it. My own perception began to reorganize around that understanding. I was no longer the observer who had arrived at a location to investigate an event. I was the subject of an event that had already been in progress before my arrival. The blood trail behind me had not been concealed. It had been left intact. That detail became impossible to ignore. Evidence that could have been erased had been preserved. Evidence that could have been hidden had been left accessible. The environment had not interfered with its visibility. The trail had remained intact long enough to guide me forward without interruption. It had not needed to pursue me. It had needed only to allow me to arrive. Its eyes remained fixed on mine, uninterrupted. There was no urgency in its gaze. No aggression. Only sustained, controlled recognition. And in that recognition, I understood that observation had never belonged exclusively to me. I had entered its field of awareness long before it entered mine. The first step it took was slow enough that I could see every phase of the motion. Its weight shifted forward, transferring through the hip and thigh before the foot lifted from the earth. The ground beneath it released without resistance, as if accustomed to its presence. The foot came down again with precision, not crushing the leaves beneath it but compressing them silently. There was no wasted motion. No uncertainty. It had chosen to reduce the distance between us, and that choice altered the balance of the encounter immediately. My body reacted before my mind could interpret the action. My muscles tightened, my breathing stopped involuntarily for a fraction of a second. I did not raise my weapon. I did not move backward. I remained still, not because of courage, but because retreat in that moment felt like surrender to something I could not outrun. My legs did not trust themselves to move without failing. It took a second step. The motion was identical in precision to the first. Its upper body remained steady while the lower body advanced, preserving its posture without disruption. Its eyes did not leave mine. The distance between us shortened by no more than 2 or 3 feet, but the change was enough to make its size fully undeniable. It was larger than my mind had allowed me to accept from a distance. I could now see details of its face with disturbing clarity. The skin around its eyes was thicker, darker, deeply set into the structure beneath. There were no visible eyelashes. The surface did not soften or shift with expression. It remained fixed, controlled, resistant to interpretation. Its gaze did not carry emotion. It carried intention. Its mouth opened slightly, not in aggression, but in measured release of breath. The air that left it carried that dense organic odor more strongly now, filling the space between us. It was not a sound of threat. It was a sound of presence. The breath was slow, controlled, and purposeful. It wanted me to perceive it fully, without obstruction. My hands trembled more noticeably now. The effort to suppress the motion had failed. The tremor traveled up through my wrists into my forearms. My fingers felt numb, disconnected from precise control. I could feel sweat cooling along my spine beneath my uniform. My heart beat so forcefully I feared it might destabilize my posture. It stopped advancing. It had closed the distance only slightly, and then it halted, maintaining that new position with absolute stillness. It did not need to come closer. The adjustment was enough to establish dominance over the space we occupied. The clearing no longer felt neutral. It felt defined by its presence. I understood then that this was confrontation, but not in the way I had been trained to understand confrontation. There was no aggression. No display of violence. It was asserting control through proximity and awareness. It was communicating through position alone. Its head tilted downward slightly, aligning its eyes more directly with mine. The angle forced me to look upward marginally to maintain eye contact. That subtle change in elevation altered the psychological structure of the encounter. It had not towered over me before. Now it did. My breathing remained shallow. My throat was dry. My muscles ached from enforced stillness. Every instinct urged withdrawal, but withdrawal required movement, and movement required permission from a body that no longer trusted its own autonomy. It inhaled again, deeper this time. Its chest expanded fully. The muscles beneath its surface shifted with controlled cohesion. It was not preparing to strike. It was reinforcing its presence. In that moment, I understood that the confrontation did not exist to harm me. It existed to establish something far more permanent. Recognition. It did not advance further. That was the first and most unsettling confirmation of its intent. It had moved only enough to alter the balance of the encounter, not enough to complete it through physical force. It had no need to close the remaining distance. The work it had come to do was already unfolding, and it required no contact. The understanding settled into me with a quiet, irreversible certainty. Behind it, at the far edge of the clearing, I saw movement that did not belong to the figure itself. It was lower to the ground, partially concealed beneath the layered undergrowth. My eyes shifted for a fraction of a second, and in that fraction I saw what had led me there. The injured driver lay on the ground, not sprawled in chaos, but positioned deliberately on its back, limbs at unnatural angles. The chest did not rise. The body did not move. The blood that had marked the trail had dried dark against clothing that was torn but not shredded. The driver's face was visible, and it was not contorted in panic or pain. It was empty of expression. The eyes were open, fixed on nothing. The mouth was partially open, as if the last act had been the attempt to breathe. There were no visible wounds consistent with animal attack, no tearing, no crushing. The body appeared intact, but the absence of life was absolute. The stillness was complete. My stomach dropped, and a deeper wave of nausea forced its way upward. I swallowed hard, fighting the reflex to bend forward. The driver had not escaped the vehicle. The driver had been removed from it. The distinction mattered in ways I could not fully articulate at the time. Removal implied intervention. Removal implied intent. The figure did not turn to look at the body. It did not need to. It remained focused on me. That singular focus carried a message more direct than any action it could have taken. The driver was no longer relevant. The encounter had shifted entirely to include me. The consequence had already been delivered, and I had been allowed to witness the result. My hands had grown cold, my fingers stiff. I could feel the tremors spreading into my arms, into my shoulders. My breathing had become shallow enough that I had to consciously force each inhalation. The air felt heavy, resistant. My vision remained clear, but my peripheral awareness had narrowed further, isolating the figure and the body as the only elements that existed. The ranger's voice came again through the radio, louder now, strained. He called my name repeatedly, instructing withdrawal. His words reached me, but they did not immediately translate into action. My body remained anchored in place, bound by something stronger than discipline or fear. It was recognition. The figure shifted its head slightly, not breaking eye contact. The motion was minimal, but it carried meaning. It was not warning me away. It was confirming that I had seen enough. The body behind it was not presented as threat. It was presented as evidence. I realized then that the driver had not been attacked in the conventional sense. There had been no struggle visible in the clearing, no widespread disturbance of ground or vegetation. The removal had been controlled. Precise. Deliberate. The violence, if it could be called violence, had occurred without chaos. The implication formed slowly but conclusively. The driver had crossed into this space unintentionally. The driver had not been permitted to leave it alive. And now I stood in the same space, having crossed the same boundary. The figure did not need to harm me physically to alter the course of my existence. The harm had already been delivered through knowledge, through recognition, through inclusion. And in that moment, I understood that survival did not mean escape. Survival meant carrying what I now knew permanently, without relief. The ranger's voice broke through the containment of the clearing with a sharp urgency that did not belong to the stillness surrounding me. He spoke my name again, louder this time, his words no longer restrained by the cautious tone he had used before. "Withdraw," he said. "Slowly. Do not turn away." The instruction aligned with what my body had already begun to accept as necessary, but my muscles resisted immediate obedience. It was not defiance. It was the involuntary paralysis that follows sustained exposure to something the mind cannot assimilate. The figure did not react to the ranger's voice. Its attention remained fixed on me, uninterrupted, unwavering. That alone confirmed that its awareness extended beyond simple sensory reaction. It chose its focus. It chose its priorities. The ranger's presence existed somewhere beyond the clearing, but the figure had determined that the exchange taking place here was not yet concluded. I forced my right foot to move first, drawing it backward slowly, maintaining balance while preserving visual contact. The motion felt unnatural, like stepping away from gravity itself. My muscles responded with hesitation, resisting the command with subtle trembling. I did not look down. I did not break eye contact. I understood instinctively that to break that connection prematurely would shift the balance of the encounter in ways I could not control. The ground behind me compressed beneath my weight, leaves settling with a faint sound that seemed louder than it should have been. The figure did not pursue. It did not close the distance further. It remained in place, observing the retreat as it had observed the approach. Its posture did not change. It allowed the withdrawal. I took another step, then another, each movement deliberate, controlled. My breathing remained shallow, constrained by the persistent pressure in my chest. My hands continued to tremble at my sides, though I kept them visible, resisting the urge to reach for my weapon. That impulse had lost its meaning. There was nothing my weapon could accomplish here. The driver's body remained visible behind the figure, unmoving, final. The clearing itself had become fixed in my perception, etched into memory with a clarity that did not require reinforcement. I did not allow myself to look away from the figure to focus on the body again. The figure was the point of consequence. The body was only confirmation. The ranger's voice continued to guide me, his words steady despite the strain beneath them. He instructed distance, instructed calm, instructed restraint. His tone suggested familiarity with the procedure, though procedure implied repetition, and repetition implied prior encounters. That realization added another layer of weight to what I was experiencing. The figure inhaled slowly once more, its chest expanding and contracting with the same measured control. It did not shift its weight. It did not advance. It permitted the retreat as an act of completion rather than escape. That distinction became clear as the distance between us increased. When I reached the edge of the clearing, the vegetation began to obscure its lower body. The rhododendron leaves partially concealed its legs, but its upper form remained visible, its gaze still fixed on me. I stepped backward again, and the vegetation rose higher between us, gradually dissolving the physical outline without dissolving the presence itself. The last detail I saw clearly was its eyes. They remained steady, reflective, aware. There was no aggression in them. There was no mercy either. There was only recognition. Then the vegetation closed fully between us, and it was no longer visible. The pressure in my chest did not disappear when it was out of sight. The encounter had not ended. It had only transitioned into permanence. The ranger reached me before I had fully regained control of my own breathing. His hand closed around my shoulder with firm precision, guiding me backward without hesitation. He did not look past me into the clearing. He did not attempt to confirm what I had seen. His actions suggested prior understanding, as if my removal had already been anticipated long before my arrival. I did not resist. Resistance would have implied control I no longer possessed. We moved uphill in silence, retracing the path that had led me there. The forest gradually resumed its familiar structure as distance increased. Sound returned first. Then movement. Then the ordinary environmental continuity that had been absent within the clearing. The transition was gradual, but it did not restore what had been altered. When the service road came back into view, its presence felt artificial. The cruiser remained where I had left it, unchanged, unaffected. The equipment I carried remained intact, functional, and insufficient. Its presence had not failed mechanically. It had failed structurally. It had been designed for conditions governed by human expectations. Those expectations had proven incomplete. I completed the required reports in the days that followed. The accident was documented. The driver's death was attributed to injuries sustained during impact. The clearing was not referenced. The entity was not referenced. The report remained internally consistent and externally incomplete. That incompleteness was not error. It was preservation. Sleep did not restore equilibrium. Each time I closed my eyes, the clearing returned in precise structural detail. Not distorted. Not exaggerated. Preserved exactly as it had existed. Its posture. Its stillness. Its eyes. Recognition had become permanent. In the weeks that followed, I became aware of the limitations that had existed in my preparation that day. I had entered that terrain with only the standard equipment required by routine assignment. I had trusted that routine would remain sufficient. That assumption had not survived contact with conditions beyond its design. Preparation had never been defined by weight or quantity. It had been defined by expectation. My expectations had been incomplete. I began to adjust my approach to remote environments, not out of fear, but out of structural correction. Equipment became less about procedure and more about contingency. Not because equipment could prevent what had occurred, but because entering such terrain without preparation now represented unacceptable exposure. The forest itself had not changed. My understanding of it had. Routine assignments continued. Patrol continued. Documentation continued. My external behavior remained consistent with operational expectation. Internally, the structure of certainty had been permanently altered. I no longer assumed visibility guaranteed awareness. I no longer assumed presence guaranteed control. There were moments, rare but unmistakable, when I would enter wooded areas during routine patrol and feel the same environmental resistance that had existed in the clearing. Not visual. Not audible. Structural. The absence of confirmation did not eliminate the possibility of observation. The equipment I carried no longer represented authority. It represented acknowledgement. Acknowledgement of incomplete control. Acknowledgement of environmental conditions that did not conform to operational assumptions. Preparation had become permanent, not because it could eliminate risk, but because absence of preparation had already revealed its consequence. Recognition had not ended when I left the clearing. It had followed me. Years passed, but the encounter did not diminish with time. It did not blur at the edges as memory usually does. It remained preserved with unnatural precision, as if it existed outside the normal decay of recollection. I did not need reminders. I did not need triggers. It remained present beneath ordinary thought, waiting without urgency, unchanged by distance or duration. That persistence alone carried meaning I could not ignore. I returned to that region only once in an official capacity after the incident. It was part of routine patrol reassignment, months later, under different circumstances. I did not request the assignment, but I did not refuse it either. Refusal would have required explanation. Explanation would have required admission. Admission was not permitted within the structure that had formed around the encounter. I did not approach the service road. I did not approach the clearing. I remained within visible terrain, within the boundaries of maintained paths and defined authority. But even at that distance, I could feel the presence of the area as something distinct from its surroundings. It was not marked by physical barriers. It was marked by absence. The absence of birds. The absence of insect movement. The absence of environmental continuity. I understood then that the clearing had never belonged to me, nor to the driver, nor to any system of jurisdiction or ownership. It existed independently of those constructs. It had always existed. We had entered it without permission, believing that permission was unnecessary. That belief had been incorrect. The driver had crossed that boundary without recognition. I had crossed it with recognition. That difference had determined the outcome. The driver had been removed permanently. I had been corrected. Correction did not mean forgiveness. Correction meant adjustment. I had been allowed to leave not because I had escaped, but because the encounter had fulfilled its purpose. I had seen it. It had seen me. The exchange had been completed. The name I eventually assigned to it came reluctantly, years after the encounter. Not because naming it would define it, but because not naming it allowed it to remain uncontained even within my own thoughts. I refer to it now only as Creature Asheville. Designation is 03. The designation is not official. It is personal. It acknowledges location, time, and recognition. It acknowledges that it exists outside formal record while remaining anchored in lived reality. Naming it did not diminish its presence. It did not provide comfort. It only confirmed permanence. It had not been an anomaly. It had been part of a structure I had not previously perceived. A structure governed by boundaries that do not appear on maps and do not recognize authority. I was not attacked. I was not pursued. I was not harmed in the conventional sense. But harm is not limited to physical damage. Harm can occur through recognition alone. Recognition alters perception permanently. It removes the protection of ignorance. I understood then that it had not been confined to that clearing. The clearing had been only one point of intersection. It existed beyond that location, beyond that time. It had chosen that moment because the boundary had been crossed. And once crossed, it had chosen to correct rather than destroy. The most disturbing truth is not that it exists. The most disturbing truth is that it allowed me to continue existing after seeing it. Because allowing me to live ensured that I would carry the boundary within me. And boundaries, once known, are never truly left behind. I did not write this immediately after the encounter. Time was necessary, not to forget, but to confirm that forgetting would never occur. Memory does not always degrade. Certain forms of recognition preserve themselves without distortion, unaffected by distance or routine. This was one of them. It remained intact, unchanged, immune to the erosion that normally protects the mind from permanence. I continued my service for years after the incident. I performed my duties without deviation. I responded to calls. I entered environments that resembled the terrain surrounding Asheville. Externally, nothing had changed. Internally, everything had. The forest was no longer an environment defined by geography. It was an environment defined by boundary. Boundaries do not announce themselves. They do not present visible markers. They exist as conditions rather than locations. You only recognize them after they have already been crossed. The driver had crossed that boundary without awareness. I had crossed it with awareness. That distinction had determined outcome. The driver had been removed. I had been allowed to remain. Allowed. That word did not suggest mercy. It suggested decision. I began to understand that survival had not been determined by my authority, my training, or my intent. Survival had been permitted because the encounter had achieved its structural purpose. Recognition had been completed. Correction had been applied. Preparation became permanent after that day. Not because preparation could prevent encounter, but because absence of preparation represented a form of blindness I could no longer accept. Entering remote terrain without reliable light, without awareness of environmental limitation, without contingency, was no longer operationally acceptable. Darkness was no longer empty space. It was undefined space. The tools I carried did not create safety. They created awareness. Awareness did not eliminate risk. It eliminated ignorance. Ignorance had been the condition that allowed the encounter to occur without resistance. Awareness had been the condition that allowed me to leave it alive. I did not return to that clearing. Not because of fear. Because return was unnecessary. The boundary no longer existed only in that location. It existed within my perception. I carried it with me permanently. There have been moments since then, standing in wooded terrain under low light conditions, when I have felt the same structural stillness that existed in Asheville. The same environmental absence. The same sensation of incomplete visibility. Those moments do not produce panic. They produce confirmation. Confirmation that the encounter had not been an isolated anomaly. Confirmation that it had been part of a structure that continues to exist independently of human awareness. It did not need to pursue me. It did not need to threaten me. It had already corrected the only condition that mattered. I had seen it. And it had allowed me to continue seeing the world afterward, knowing that light does not eliminate what exists in darkness. It only reveals how much remains outside its reach.